She didn't come to fight. She came to dance. Mariana had spent the whole week working double shifts at the salon and waiting tables at night. Saturday night was her escape. She wore her favorite black heels, curled her hair just right, and added a bold red lipstick that made her feel unstoppable. She wasn't asking for much, just music, lights, and laughter with her sister and best friend. But when she reached the velvet ropes outside the downtown club, everything changed. "Private event," the bouncer said without even glancing up. Confused, she watched two white girls giggle their way in right before her. No wristbands, no guest list. "But it's public tonight, no?" she asked, her accent soft but clear. He smirked. "Not for you. Try the bar down the street." Her stomach dropped. Her pride cracked. For a few seconds, she froze. Then she did something unexpected. 20 minutes later, she returned. Not with friends, not with tears, but with a police officer, a recording, and a quiet fire in her eyes. Now it was his turn to explain himself. Mariana had only been in Chicago for 8 months, but every day since her arrival felt like a delicate balance between survival and ambition. She had come from Monterey with her younger sister Karina, both carrying more hope than money, more dreams than plans. While Karina had enrolled in a local community college, Mariana found work at a beauty salon in the Pilsen neighborhood, where she quickly built a reputation for her precision and friendly nature. When she wasn't styling hair, she picked up shifts at a small burger joint just off Roosevelt Road, saving every dollar she could. The city wasn't always kind, but she liked the rhythm of it. The way buses roared down the street, the smell of hot dogs from corner vendors, the mosaic of people rushing to places unknown. Saturday was the only night they allowed themselves to breathe. It had become a small ritual. Take a long shower, borrow each other's clothes, do makeup together while reggaeton played softly in the background. For once, there were no worries about rent, classes, or side gigs. It was their space, their time to just exist as young women. That week, their friend Letty had told them about a trendy club downtown called the Velvet Roof. The club's Instagram page was flooded with photos of stylish people dancing under purple lights, smiling with drinks in hand. It looked dreamy, like a place far away from reality. The girls planned their night meticulously. Mariana wore a fitted black dress with thin straps and layered a light denim jacket over it. Karina went for something flashier, a red dress that hugged her body and made her feel fearless. They took the train to the Loop and grabbed a coffee before heading to the club. As they walked past the high rises and twinkling lights, Karina kept snapping photos on her phone while Mariana smiled but stayed more reserved. She was always cautious in unfamiliar places, especially in a country where her accent could shift the way someone looked at her. When they arrived, a line had formed outside the entrance. People chatted, laughed, and checked their reflections in the club's mirrored facade. Two men in matching jackets whispered to each other. A group of girls posed for selfies near the neon sign. Everything looked like a scene from a music video. The bouncers were tall, dressed in black, wearing earpieces, and standing like statues with arms crossed. As Mariana and Karina reached the front of the line, a wave of nervous energy passed between them. They knew how it sometimes went in clubs. Sometimes it was your outfit, sometimes your ID, sometimes the way you looked. The bouncer didn't look at them when he said there was a private event. His voice was bored, his eyes glued to his phone. But Mariana noticed the contradiction immediately. The two white girls in front of them had gone in without wristbands. They hadn't even been asked questions. No hesitation, just a nod and a smile. She tried to explain, tried to clarify, but something about her voice, her Spanish-inflected English, the way she formed her vowels, seemed to seal the judgment. The bouncer gave a half smirk and gestured toward a dive bar across the street. Mariana's face burned. She felt as if the people behind them were staring, wondering what the fuss was about. Karina, clearly embarrassed, pulled on her sister's sleeve, trying to leave quickly. But Mariana stood still for a few seconds longer. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from something deeper, something raw. She had worked too hard to be made to feel like she didn't belong. She had stayed quiet too many times in too many places, when someone mocked her English, when customers asked if she was legal, when men at the burger joint assumed she was too dumb to understand sarcasm. But tonight she wasn't in a uniform. She wasn't cleaning a table or sweeping a floor. She was just a young woman who wanted to dance. And they told her she wasn't welcome. Because of her voice. As the bouncer turned back to his phone, Mariana took a breath, pulled out her phone, and checked something quickly. A block away, she had seen a police officer earlier near a coffee shop. She remembered the badge. The uniform. She remembered thinking how safe the area looked with cops casually patrolling. It was a thought she rarely had. In her neighborhood, cops didn't always feel like protection. She told Karina to wait and walked down the street, her heels clicking against the concrete. The night air was cooler now. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from nerves, from rage. A quiet, cold rage that didn't scream or cry. It moved silently, efficiently. When she approached the officer, she didn't shout. She explained. Calmly, directly. She showed him the club's Instagram post from that day that said the event was open to the public. She showed him the video she had quickly started recording the moment the bouncer dismissed her. She told him she wasn't asking for special treatment. Just fairness. The officer was younger than she expected, with kind eyes and a clipped tone. He asked a few questions, nodded, and agreed to walk with her. As they returned, Mariana saw Karina still standing near the curb, nervously twisting the strap of her purse. The club lights flickered overhead. People still lined up, laughed, entered. The bouncer looked up when he saw them. His face shifted. It wasn't fear, exactly. But it wasn't boredom anymore. Mariana didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She held her phone, screen glowing, still recording. The officer asked the bouncer a few pointed questions. He asked about entry policies. He asked about selective enforcement. He mentioned the city's anti-discrimination codes. Mariana stood just behind them, watching the man who had humiliated her try to justify his actions. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gloat. But inside her, something changed. She was tired of pretending not to notice. Tired of lowering her voice. Tired of accepting that some doors just wouldn't open for people like her. Tonight, that door didn't open either. But this time, someone had to answer for it. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the half-closed blinds of the small apartment Mariana and Karina shared. Dust particles floated in the air, undisturbed, as if the world had paused in reflection. But in Mariana's chest, nothing was still. The previous night played on a loop in her head, every dismissive glance, every word laced with condescension, every mocking laugh that followed them as they walked away from the club. It wasn't the first time they had been treated like outsiders, but something about this night had shattered a fragile boundary she didn't realize she'd been preserving. Karina, still wrapped in a blanket, lay curled on the futon, her breathing soft and slow. She hadn't said much after they returned home, just offered Mariana a tight hug before retreating into sleep. But Mariana had stayed up. She had replayed the video on her phone, watched the officer's face as he asked questions, watched the bouncer fumble for words. She had posted the clip anonymously to a local subreddit about Chicago nightlife, then sent a longer version to a local journalist's tip line. She hadn't been sure what she expected to come from it, maybe nothing, but pressing send had felt like closing a wound. Her phone buzzed around 8 a.m. The number was unknown. She hesitated but picked it up anyway. A woman's voice introduced herself as Lila Mendoza, a reporter for a bilingual Chicago news outlet that often covered issues affecting the Latino community. Lila had seen the video, read Mariana's short explanation, and wanted to talk. Her voice wasn't pushy or sensational. She simply said, "We think it matters." Mariana agreed to meet later that afternoon. She woke Karina and told her, gently, about the call. Karina looked apprehensive at first, worried that they'd be targeted or made into a spectacle, but Mariana's determination calmed her. There was a steadiness in Mariana's expression, something solid, like stone. Karina nodded and quietly began helping Mariana prepare. They met Lila at a cafe not far from Little Village. The reporter was in her mid-30s, dressed plainly, notebook in hand, eyes alert but warm. She asked questions carefully, respectfully, allowing Mariana to speak at her own pace. She didn't interrupt. She didn't translate Mariana's experiences into statistics or jargon. She just listened. Then she asked to see the video again, took a few notes, and promised to follow up. By the end of the day, the clip had begun circulating beyond the Reddit thread. It appeared on a local Facebook group called Chicago Unfiltered. The caption read, "Turned away for her accent? You decide." Thousands of views followed. Dozens of comments poured in. Some were predictable, defensive, dismissive, even cruel. But many were outraged. Others shared similar stories about being followed in stores, ignored at counters, or ridiculed for their pronunciation. A familiar pattern emerged, one built on small exclusions that added up to something massive and suffocating. Back at home, Karina was scrolling through the comments, wide-eyed. Mariana watched her sister's expression change from disbelief to quiet validation. Karina had always been more sensitive, more hopeful that people were just having bad days. But seeing strangers, many of them other Latinas, echoing their pain made something click. She looked up and whispered that maybe it wasn't in their heads after all. Later that night, Mariana received a message on Instagram from someone claiming to be a former employee at the club. The profile looked real: photos, friends, years of posts. The message was short but sharp. The woman said she had worked at the Velvet Roof for 8 months before quitting due to similar incidents. She confirmed that there were no strict dress codes or guest lists most nights, only vibes, a term used by management to give staff free rein to deny entry as they saw fit. According to her, vibes usually meant white, trendy, and English-speaking. The woman offered to speak on record but anonymously. Mariana forwarded the message to Lila. Within 24 hours, Lila had turned the story into a small feature on their site. Club accused of discrimination, video sparks backlash. It wasn't front-page news. But it was something. It was out there. Mariana's photo wasn't used. Her name wasn't revealed. But her story was unfolding. At work, things were quieter than usual. Her boss at the salon, a first-generation Dominican woman named Rosa, had seen the article and gave Mariana a nod of solidarity. She didn't ask questions, just said that if anyone called asking about Mariana to direct them to her. At the burger place, a few coworkers looked at her differently. One of them, a guy who never talked much, simply said, "Respect," as he passed her at the soda machine. But not all responses were supportive. That evening, Mariana checked the club's Instagram page. The comments on their recent posts were flooded with backlash. People demanded explanations. Some asked if the video was real. Others posted memes mocking the term vibes. Then she noticed a new post, an announcement claiming the club welcomes all patrons regardless of race, gender, or language, and that they would be reviewing their internal policies. No mention of the incident. No apology. Karina rolled her eyes. Mariana stared at the screen unmoved. She had expected this. She didn't need their words. She had already heard their actions. 3 days after the video first went viral, Lila messaged again. A city council member from the 25th Ward had seen the report and was planning to bring it up at the next public meeting. He wanted Mariana to attend. Not to speak unless she wanted to. Just to be there as a reminder of what silence often ignores. Mariana didn't respond right away. That night, she sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment lit by a single overhead bulb. Her fingers tapped lightly on the surface. She thought about her mother, who always told her to be quiet, to not make waves, to stay grateful. She thought about the girls behind her in line that night, walking into a world that always opened its doors. She thought about how many people never recorded, never posted, never got to come back with a police officer. She wasn't a hero. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. But she had told the truth. And sometimes that was enough to move something. Even just a little. Even for one night. She clicked reply. She typed yes. Then she closed her laptop and went to bed. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the half-closed blinds of the small apartment Mariana and Karina shared. Dust particles floated in the air, undisturbed, as if the world had paused in reflection. But in Mariana's chest, nothing was still. The previous night played on a loop in her head, every dismissive glance, every word laced with condescension, every mocking laugh that followed them as they walked away from the club. It wasn't the first time they had been treated like outsiders, but something about this night had shattered a fragile boundary she didn't realize she'd been preserving. Karina, still wrapped in a blanket, lay curled on the futon, her breathing soft and slow. She hadn't said much after they returned home, just offered Mariana a tight hug before retreating into sleep. But Mariana had stayed up. She had replayed the video on her phone, watched the officer's face as he asked questions, watched the bouncer fumble for words. She had posted the clip anonymously to a local subreddit about Chicago nightlife, then sent a longer version to a local journalist's tip line. She hadn't been sure what she expected to come from it, maybe nothing, but pressing send had felt like closing a wound. Her phone buzzed around 8 a.m. The number was unknown. She hesitated but picked it up anyway. A woman's voice introduced herself as Lila Mendoza, a reporter for a bilingual Chicago news outlet that often covered issues affecting the Latino community. Lila had seen the video, read Mariana's short explanation, and wanted to talk. Her voice wasn't pushy or sensational. She simply said, "We think it matters." Mariana agreed to meet later that afternoon. She woke Karina and told her, gently, about the call. Karina looked apprehensive at first, worried that they'd be targeted or made into a spectacle, but Mariana's determination calmed her. There was a steadiness in Mariana's expression, something solid, like stone. Karina nodded and quietly began helping Mariana prepare. They met Lila at a cafe not far from Little Village. The reporter was in her mid-30s, dressed plainly, notebook in hand, eyes alert but warm. She asked questions carefully, respectfully, allowing Mariana to speak at her own pace. She didn't interrupt. She didn't translate Mariana's experiences into statistics or jargon. She just listened. Then she asked to see the video again, took a few notes, and promised to follow up. By the end of the day, the clip had begun circulating beyond the Reddit thread. It appeared on a local Facebook group called Chicago Unfiltered. The caption read, "Turned away for her accent? You decide." Thousands of views followed. Dozens of comments poured in. Some were predictable, defensive, dismissive, even cruel. But many were outraged. Others shared similar stories about being followed in stores, ignored at counters, or ridiculed for their pronunciation. A familiar pattern emerged, one built on small exclusions that added up to something massive and suffocating. Back at home, Karina was scrolling through the comments, wide-eyed. Mariana watched her sister's expression change from disbelief to quiet validation. Karina had always been more sensitive, more hopeful that people were just having bad days. But seeing strangers, many of them other Latinas, echoing their pain made something click. She looked up and whispered that maybe it wasn't in their heads after all. Later that night, Mariana received a message on Instagram from someone claiming to be a former employee at the club. The profile looked real, photos, friends, years of posts. The message was short but sharp. The woman said she had worked at the Velvet Roof for 8 months before quitting due to similar incidents. She confirmed that there were no strict dress codes or guest lists most nights, only vibes, a term used by management to give staff free rein to deny entry as they saw fit. According to her, vibes usually meant white, trendy, and English-speaking. The woman offered to speak on record but anonymously. Mariana forwarded the message to Lila. Within 24 hours, Lila had turned the story into a small feature on their site. Club accused of discrimination. Video sparks backlash. It wasn't front-page news, but it was something. It was out there. Mariana's photo wasn't used. Her name wasn't revealed. But her story was unfolding. At work, things were quieter than usual. Her boss at the salon, a first-generation Dominican woman named Rosa, had seen the article and gave Mariana a nod of solidarity. She didn't ask questions, just said that if anyone called asking about Mariana, to direct them to her. At the burger place, a few co-workers looked at her differently. One of them, a guy who never talked much, simply said, "Respect," as he passed her at the soda machine. But not all responses were supportive. That evening, Mariana checked the club's Instagram page. The comments on their recent posts were flooded with backlash. People demanded explanations. Some asked if the video was real. Others posted memes mocking the term vibes. Then she noticed a new post, an announcement claiming the club welcomes all patrons regardless of race, gender, or language, and that they would be reviewing their internal policies. No mention of the incident. No apology. Karina rolled her eyes. Mariana stared at the screen, unmoved. She had expected this. She didn't need their words. She had already heard their actions. 3 days after the video first went viral, Lila messaged again. A city council member from the 25th ward had seen the report and was planning to bring it up at the next public meeting. He wanted Mariana to attend, not to speak unless she wanted to, just to be there, as a reminder of what silence often ignores. Mariana didn't respond right away. That night, she sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment, lit by a single overhead bulb. Her fingers tapped lightly on the surface. She thought about her mother, who always told her to be quiet, to not make waves, to stay grateful. She thought about the girls behind her in line that night, walking into a world that always opened its doors. She thought about how many people never recorded, never posted, never got to come back with a police officer. She wasn't a hero. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, but she had told the truth. And sometimes that was enough to move something, even just a little, even for one night. She clicked reply. She typed yes. Then she closed her laptop and went to bed. The day of the city council meeting arrived with an unusual sense of tension in the air. The early spring sky was gray and heavy, threatening rain that never quite came. Mariana stood by her bedroom mirror, staring at her reflection in silence. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a cream blouse, and a thin jacket that Karina had insisted on ironing the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. No makeup, no accessories. Just herself, present and unpolished. She didn't want to appear performative or fragile. She wanted to look like who she was, someone who had been wronged and refused to disappear quietly. Karina had offered to come along, but Mariana insisted on going alone. It wasn't that she wanted to exclude her sister. It was that she needed to know she could stand on her own. This wasn't a performance for validation or support. It was an act of reclamation. She wasn't trying to be loud. She was trying to be heard. The city council chamber was colder than she expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. Fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow across rows of wooden benches. City staffers moved back and forth with clipboards and hushed voices. A few local residents had shown up to speak about potholes, property taxes, and noise complaints. At first, Mariana felt out of place, like a foreign object wedged into the machinery of bureaucracy. But then she saw Lila sitting in the back, typing on a small laptop, and next to her, the councilman who had invited her. He gave a polite nod when their eyes met, not eager or over-friendly, just a quiet gesture of recognition. That helped. The meeting began slowly with procedural motions and vote confirmations. Mariana listened to the voices around her, some dispassionate, some deeply personal, as neighbors brought up the things that mattered to them. A woman spoke about her son's school losing funding. A man brought photographs of a broken streetlight that had caused a car accident. Life in the city, raw and layered, presented itself in scattered fragments. When the councilman finally stood to speak about discrimination in nightlife venues, the room shifted slightly. A few heads turned toward Mariana as if sensing that something heavier was entering the space. The councilman didn't mention her name, just the facts. He referenced the video, the story that had gained traction online, the public backlash, and the lack of response from the venue itself. He called for an investigation into discriminatory entry policies at all entertainment venues that received city licenses. He spoke not like a politician, but like someone who had seen this story too many times in too many forms. When he finished, the room remained quiet. No applause. Just silence, and then the meeting moved on. Mariana stayed until the end, though her part had passed. As she exited the chamber, her legs felt heavy. Not from fear, but from the emotional weight she carried. Outside, the air had cooled. She sat on a bench near the building's entrance and took a long breath. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't needed to. Her presence had said enough. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something larger had begun, something she couldn't fully control. The following days blurred together. Requests started arriving in her inbox. Local bloggers wanted interviews. A podcaster who focused on immigrant stories reached out. One message came from a law student who was organizing a panel on systemic bias in urban spaces. Another came from a woman in Texas who had seen the video and wanted to tell Mariana her story about being denied housing due to her last name. Mariana read each message carefully. Some made her feel seen. Others made her feel exhausted. She didn't respond to most. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want this moment to become a spectacle. She had no interest in being a symbol or a hashtag. At work, things returned to routine. Hair appointments, coffee runs, folding towels. Rosa, her boss, occasionally gave her a look that said everything: respect, protectiveness, and something else, too: pride. Mariana kept her head down, but she could feel the shift. Clients asked more questions. One woman tipped her twice as much as usual. Another said she had read about the club girl and hoped things would change. Despite the support, Mariana remained guarded. Part of her feared retaliation. The club had remained mostly silent, issuing only vague statements that failed to acknowledge what had happened. But one morning, as she passed by a newspaper stand, she noticed a headline in a local alternative weekly: "Nightlife Gatekeeping: Who Gets In and Who Gets Turned Away." The photo beneath it wasn't of her, but of the club's glowing sign taken from the street. She bought the paper and read the article during her lunch break. It was well-written, balanced, and factual. It named the patterns: how certain venues used subjective criteria to control who entered, how phrases like "guest list only" or "private event" often acted as shields against accountability. It cited academic studies, quoted community leaders, and even included a statement from the anonymous former employee Mariana had connected with. The article didn't center Mariana, but it echoed her experience within a larger context. It framed her story as part of a systemic problem rather than an isolated incident. Reading it brought a strange relief. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't overreacting. She had touched something real, something long-standing and rotten beneath the surface of polished dance floors and velvet ropes. Still, she didn't quite know what to do with that knowledge. One evening, Karina came home excited. Her college was organizing a Latinx Heritage Week and wanted Mariana to participate in a student-led panel about representation and equity. Mariana hesitated but agreed. The panel was modest, held in a campus auditorium with folding chairs and a modest microphone setup. She sat alongside two professors, a local activist, and a Puerto Rican poet. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't prepare a speech. She just told the story the way it happened, no embellishments. As she spoke, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. The students weren't just listening. They were leaning in. Their eyes weren't just attentive, they were searching, as if recognizing something in her that reflected their own experiences. When she finished, a quiet moment passed before the applause began. And this time, it didn't feel performative. It felt earned. After the event, a young student approached her and said that hearing her speak made her feel like she wasn't crazy for noticing how she was treated differently depending on where she went or how she dressed. Another said he was inspired to start filming more of what happened in his neighborhood. Mariana smiled, thanked them, and walked home with Karina under a sky finally clear of clouds. She realized then that she had crossed a threshold. Not into activism or fame, but into something more intimate and powerful, a sense of self no longer shaped by silence or shame. She had found her place, not inside the club that night, but outside of it, with her head held high and her voice steady. The doors that had once closed in her face no longer defined her. Because now, when they shut her out, she knew how to push back. Not with rage, not with tears, but with truth, persistence, and the quiet certainty that she had every right to stand exactly where she was. In the weeks that followed, Mariana began to notice changes that were subtle but undeniable. They didn't come in the form of apologies or reparations, and certainly not from the club that had rejected her. But there was a shift, small tremors that traveled through the fabric of her daily life. People started recognizing her on the street. Not often, but just enough to make her pause. A woman in line at the grocery store leaned in and whispered that she had seen the video. A man sweeping the sidewalk outside his taco truck offered her a free coffee with a knowing smile. It wasn't fame, and Mariana didn't want fame. It was something else, a silent acknowledgement that her experience had cracked open a truth many were tired of hiding. Karina noticed it too. She had become more vocal in class, more confident when speaking in English, less afraid of raising her hand. Her sister's courage seemed to embolden her. She talked about joining a student group focused on Latinx advocacy and had even begun writing short essays about the immigrant experience, drawing from stories she had once been too shy to share. At night, their apartment felt different. The quiet had been replaced with conversation, ideas, and plans. Mariana hadn't set out to inspire change, especially not within her own home, but something about standing up for herself had created ripples that moved far beyond her control. At the salon, business continued as usual, though a few regular clients began asking more pointed questions. One woman asked Mariana if she had ever faced other forms of discrimination. Another asked if she had plans to take the club to court. Mariana always answered honestly but briefly. She didn't want her life to be reduced to a single moment of injustice. She had endured much more than one bad night. That moment was just the one that happened to be recorded. Then came an email that took her by surprise. It was from the office of a city commissioner, someone who sat on the Committee for Cultural Equity and Urban Inclusion. They were forming a community board to advise on new regulations that would require nightlife venues to adhere to non-discriminatory entrance policies. The email asked if Mariana would be interested in joining. The language was formal but respectful. They weren't offering her a stage. They were offering her a seat at the table. She read the email 3 times before responding. Saying yes wasn't difficult. What came after was. The meetings were held in a municipal building downtown every other Tuesday. The board consisted of 11 people: lawyers, artists, small business owners, youth organizers, and Mariana. At first, she felt out of place. She wasn't used to policy language, acronyms, or structured debates. But as the weeks went on, she began to find her rhythm. She spoke less often than others, but when she did, the room listened. She told stories, not theories. Described emotions, not statistics. And somehow that gave shape to the very policies they were trying to draft. During one particular meeting, they discussed whether to require training for club staff on implicit bias. Most supported the idea, but a few questioned its enforceability. Mariana didn't interrupt. She waited until the end, then shared the moment when the bouncer had looked at her and made a decision based not on what she wore or what she said, but on how she sounded. That moment, she explained, had followed her all the way home. It had followed her into sleep. It had followed her into silence. If training couldn't erase that, it could at least prevent it from happening again to someone else. The room fell quiet. The proposal passed unanimously. Karina had begun attending the meetings with her on occasion, sitting in the back with a notebook and headphones. She had started a podcast for a class project, originally intended to be about dance culture in Chicago, but had pivoted after Mariana's story exploded online. Now it was called No List, No Entry, and it explored issues of identity, access, and belonging. Mariana wasn't comfortable being recorded, but she agreed to help Karina with outlines and ideas. She even offered to reach out to a few of the people who had messaged her for interviews. Karina's voice was still soft, but it carried weight. Her podcast began gaining traction among students, and one professor even shared it in a university-wide newsletter. Despite the progress, not everything moved forward. Mariana began receiving anonymous messages on social media. Some accused her of lying. Others told her to go back to her country. A few were more threatening, laced with vague references to immigration status and work permits. She showed them to Lila, who referred her to a legal resource group. They assured her she was safe, that they would monitor the threats. Still, she began taking alternate routes home. She installed a small camera outside her apartment door. For every step forward, there was resistance, a pushback against visibility. Mariana understood now that change didn't come free. It came with fear, with fatigue, with moments of doubt that arrived like unexpected guests in the middle of the night. But she also saw what she had gained: community, voice, direction, and most of all, clarity. She no longer questioned whether what happened that night at the club had meaning. It had meaning because it had exposed something real. It had meaning because it had reached people who had no names but shared the same ache. It had meaning because it was hers and no one could take it away. One evening, as the city skyline glowed in the distance and the hum of traffic echoed below, Mariana stood by the window with a cup of tea. Karina was editing her latest podcast episode in the next room, music playing softly in the background. The apartment was warm, a little cluttered, filled with life. Mariana thought about her mother back in Monterey, who had once warned her not to speak too loudly, not to draw attention. But now she realized something. Her voice hadn't made her unsafe. Silence had. The absence of story, the erasure of truth, the belief that survival meant invisibility, that was the real danger. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if policies would pass or if clubs would change. But she knew that she had taken something back, something vital. Not just for herself, but for every girl who would stand one day in a line, in a dress with hope in her heart, only to be told she didn't belong. Now, at least there would be a record, a story, a voice, and sometimes that was the first step toward everything else. Autumn came early to Chicago that year, bringing crisp mornings and streets scattered with yellow leaves. Mariana welcomed the change. There was something comforting in the transformation of the city, in the way the air grew sharp and everything began to slow down. Life had not necessarily become easier, but it had grown deeper, fuller. She had stopped waiting for a return to normal because she had realized that normal had never been enough. Instead, she moved forward with a different kind of energy, one that came not from anger but from purpose. The story of the club had faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and louder voices, but its effects had not disappeared. Mariana carried the weight of that night with her, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what it meant to be seen and what it cost. The advisory board had become a regular part of her life. Every other Tuesday, she traveled downtown, participated in discussions, and watched as drafts turned into proposals, and proposals turned into potential laws. What had once seemed foreign now felt navigable. She understood the system better, even if she didn't always trust it. She had made allies, people who didn't just want to appear progressive but were genuinely invested in justice. Among them was an older woman named Dr. Hill, a retired professor who had spent her life researching institutional bias. They rarely agreed on approach, but their conversations always pushed Mariana to think harder, to consider consequences, and to stay grounded. Outside of meetings, Mariana continued working full-time at the salon. Rosa, ever supportive, had started giving her a more flexible schedule, especially when interviews or community events came up. Business remained steady, and clients began referring others to Mariana, not just because she was good at her craft, but because they admired her resolve. There was something magnetic about her now, an unshakable calm, a kind of authority that didn't come from titles or degrees, but from lived truth. She no longer feared confrontation. She met it with clarity. Karina's podcast had blossomed into something larger than either of them anticipated. With a small grant from a youth arts organization, she upgraded her equipment and began producing episodes in both English and Spanish. Her topics expanded: housing discrimination, food deserts, bilingual education, the emotional cost of assimilation. Mariana sometimes sat in during recordings, offering feedback, connecting Karina with people from the community. They worked like a team, unspoken in their rhythm, bonded not just by blood but by mission. In the apartment, late at night, their voices would blend with the hum of editing software and the tapping of laptop keys. They didn't go out as much as they used to. They didn't need to. One Friday afternoon, Mariana received an email from a professor at a local university. He taught a course on civic engagement and had read about her work through an article posted on the university's online journal. He invited her to speak to his class, not as an expert, but as someone whose experience could provide context to the theories he was teaching. Mariana hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, even after all the meetings and panels. But she also understood the power of being in the room, of sharing space with people who were still forming their views of the world. She agreed. The classroom was small, with rows of plastic chairs and a projector that buzzed softly in the corner. The students were mostly seniors, diverse in appearance and attitude. Some leaned forward eagerly. Others slouched in their seats with arms crossed. Mariana didn't use slides or a script. She spoke plainly, recounting the night at the club, the days that followed, and how it had forced her to step into roles she never anticipated. She spoke about fear, about exhaustion, and about how easy it was to question your own perception when the world constantly dismissed it. But she also spoke about discovery, about realizing that courage wasn't something you found, but something you grew into. The students listened. Some took notes. Others nodded. When she finished, one of them raised a hand and asked how she managed to keep going when so many systems seemed designed to exhaust people like her. Mariana paused before answering. She didn't have a perfect response. She spoke about community, about staying close to people who reminded her why the work mattered. She admitted that there were days she wanted to disappear, to go back to anonymity. But then she remembered what it felt like to be turned away, not because of who she was, but because of who someone else believed she was. That feeling of being reduced was one she would never allow to define her again. After the session, several students came up to thank her. One of them, a quiet boy with a shy voice, handed her a folded note. Later that night, at home, she opened it. It read, "You made me feel like I exist." She sat with that sentence for a long time. It was simple, small, but it held a kind of gravity that outweighed every insult, every anonymous threat, every sleepless night she had endured. Mariana didn't tell many people about the note. She kept it tucked in her wallet, folded neatly between a bus pass and a faded photograph of her and Karina as kids. It reminded her that impact was not always visible, that change often worked in quiet ways. As autumn deepened, new challenges emerged. A proposed policy on nightlife regulation was met with resistance from several venue owners who claimed that such measures would harm their businesses and create unfair scrutiny. Mariana attended a public forum where club managers and promoters spoke out against the proposed changes. One man accused the city of targeting nightlife culture unfairly, suggesting that the backlash was the result of a few overly sensitive individuals. Mariana felt her face flush. She waited until others spoke, then raised her hand. She didn't argue. She simply described what it felt like to be outside a building, dressed and ready, only to be dismissed without a glance. She described the silence that followed, the shame that lingered, and how long it took to realize that the problem wasn't hers. She ended with a question: if fairness isn't consistent, who is it really for? The room was quiet afterward. Some faces remained hardened, unmoved. Others shifted. That was enough for her. Mariana walked home that night with Karina, their steps slow beneath the orange glow of streetlights. They didn't talk much. The air was too still, the city too large to fill with casual words. But there was a quiet understanding between them, a shared certainty that what they were doing mattered, even if it didn't always show. Inside their apartment, Mariana sat by the window again, her reflection faint against the glass. She watched the lights of distant buildings flicker, the world outside humming on without pause. But inside her, something had paused. Something had settled. She didn't know what winter would bring or what the next fight would look like. But she knew this: she was no longer afraid of being seen. She was no longer afraid of being heard. And she would never again wait for permission to exist. Winter arrived with a quiet force, blanketing the city in snow and slowing everything to a crawl. The streets were slick with ice, the wind howled down narrow alleyways, and the sky remained a pale shade of gray for days at a time. Mariana moved through it all with practiced steadiness, bundled in thick coats and scarves, carrying the weight of the season like she had learned to carry so many other things. She had grown stronger in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her voice was no longer tentative. Her decisions no longer wavered. She moved through the world with a kind of deliberate grace, no longer shrinking herself to fit the spaces that once felt closed off. The city council had passed the new regulations by a narrow margin. It wasn't everything Mariana had hoped for. Many clauses had been softened, others deferred, but it was something concrete. Nightlife venues would now be required to display clearly written entry policies, and clubs that received public funding or tax incentives would undergo annual reviews for discrimination complaints. It wasn't justice, but it was a beginning. Mariana sat in the back of the chamber the night the decision was announced. She didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. It felt less like a victory and more like a marker. One step in a longer path she hadn't yet seen the end of. Word of the policy change spread slowly. Some praised it as progress. Others scoffed at it, calling it bureaucratic theater. Mariana ignored the noise. She had learned that attention was unpredictable, and that no matter how pure your intention, someone would always distort it. She kept working at the salon, helping Rosa expand their services. She continued advising on the board, and she still walked the same streets, took the same buses, ate at the same taquerias. Her life hadn't become glamorous. It had simply grown more rooted. Karina's podcast was nominated for a Regional Media Award. She was invited to speak on a panel at a local university alongside seasoned journalists and filmmakers. Mariana attended the event, sitting quietly in the second row as her sister took the stage in a navy blazer and silver earrings. Karina spoke with a fluency that made Mariana's chest tighten with pride. She talked about the power of story, about the responsibility of documenting injustice, and about the fine line between bearing witness and being consumed by the pain you carry. After the panel, several people approached Karina with compliments and collaboration offers. Mariana watched her sister beam, confident and open in ways she herself had only recently become. At home, things remained modest. Their apartment was still small, their furniture secondhand. The heating sometimes faltered, and they often had to stuff towels along the windowsills to keep out the cold drafts. But it was theirs, and inside it felt full. They decorated the space with photos, with Karina's sticky notes and Mariana's drawings. They hosted friends on weekends and made pozole in a dented pot that had traveled with them from Monterey. Their lives weren't easy, but they were lived with intention. One morning, Mariana received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, addressed to her full name, with a return address from another state. She opened it slowly. The letter came from a woman in Arizona who had watched a replay of the city council meeting online. Her own daughter, the woman wrote, had been denied service at a restaurant for speaking Spanish too loudly. She thanked Mariana for speaking up, said that her family felt less alone now, that they had printed out the article with Mariana's interview and taped it to the fridge. Mariana read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it next to the note from the student in her wallet. They were reminders, not of her importance, but of the connection between strangers who had never met but knew the same wound. The club, the Velvet Roof, eventually changed ownership. A new management team rebranded the space, renamed it, and replaced most of the staff. Mariana never went back. She passed it once on her way to a community event, noticed the new sign and the line of patrons waiting outside, but felt no urge to stop. It was no longer about the club. It never had been. The building could change, the name could be wiped clean, but the memory remained, etched into the city, into her voice, into every person who had been made to feel invisible. Spring crept in quietly, melting the snow into shallow puddles and stirring the branches back to life. With it came new opportunities. Mariana was asked to consult on a citywide cultural inclusivity initiative. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she had the capacity or desire to stretch herself further. But after a long walk and a conversation with Karina over late-night tea, she accepted. She didn't consider herself an expert, but she had experience. She had questions. And most of all, she had the ability to listen. In one of the planning meetings for the initiative, Mariana sat across from a group of young interns. They were energetic, idealistic, and eager to fix everything all at once. Mariana smiled as she listened to their proposals, remembering a time when she too believed that change came fast if you just shouted loud enough. She shared her story again, but this time, not as a warning or a protest. She told it as a thread, a piece of a larger tapestry made up of many voices. Some louder, some quieter, all necessary. The interns asked her how she remained patient. She told them she didn't. She told them there were days she wanted to scream, to quit, to disappear. But then she remembered why she started. She remembered that even the smallest shift in perspective could mean everything to someone else. Mariana walked home from that meeting with a strange lightness. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of alignment, as if her feet were finally touching the ground in a way they hadn't before. The city moved around her, horns honking, bikes zipping past, people laughing into their phones. She was part of it, not a visitor, not an outsider, a thread among many, woven tightly into the fabric of the place she now called home. That night, as she sat by the window, sipping coffee while Karina edited her latest episode, Mariana opened a blank notebook and began to write. Not for a board meeting or a policy draft. Just for herself. She wrote about the cold night when a voice told her she didn't belong, and about the quiet defiance that followed. She wrote about the silence of being turned away, and the volume of being heard afterward. She wrote about her sister's laughter, her mother's voice on the phone, the notes from strangers, and the echo of her own voice growing louder with each passing season. When she closed the notebook, the sky outside had darkened, but the city lights shimmered like a promise. Mariana didn't know what the next chapter would hold. But she knew this. She had returned to the door that once shut in her face, not to ask for entry, but to build something beyond it. And she was no longer alone.